Nadya Okamoto is the founder and executive director of Period, a youth-run organization that celebrates and provides menstrual hygiene through many platforms. Today, she is here to discuss her new book, Period Power, which explores the stigmas around menstruation while creating a strategy to stop the silence. Everyone, please give a warm BUILD Brunch welcome to Nadya Okamoto.
Hi, Lucas, nice to meet you.
Hey, nice to meet you, I'm Allie.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. My hair.
Hello, Nadya.
Hi.
Nadya. Thanks for being here. Nice to meet you. Take a seat. Let me see this book.
Yes.
First question is, I love this hand symbol, which I've never seen. Is that something that's like widespread?
Well, I just did it back then. They're like, what is that? And I was like, it's a uterus.
Yes.
Yeah.
I love that. We're going to
ovaries.
see this hand symbol more and more, I feel like, after this book comes out. So it's pretty self-explanatory, Period Power, but why did you want to write this book right now?
So I really wanted to write this book because I feel like the work that I do in what we call the menstrual movement, which is the fight for equitable access to menstrual hygiene and breaking the stigma around periods, I felt like we needed a book to sort of claim that this movement is real, right? Like this isn't just me and some friends getting together on the weekends putting together period packs anymore, but we're a real national movement trying to fight for social and systemic change. And I think that in this world, although some people might think books are outdated, I felt like a book is like, here's our manifesto and like why I think that this movement is real and like we're really doing this work for this overall movement towards gender equality.
And what was the process like for you? Because the thing I loved about it is that there's guides, there's history, you reference different religions and the impact of sex and menstruation. Like, there was a lot of information and work, so what was your process like getting it done?
So I wrote the book in like a month.
Are you serious?
Wow.
Even the research?
Yeah, so I basically locked myself in the Schlesinger Library, which is this like feminist library at Harvard, during December. And then January, I was on winter break from Harvard and wrote the book.
Wow.
And I just basically would lock myself into rooms, and it was a conglomerate of different Google Docs. And I didn't actually see the final copy or read it until my audiobook recording because I was so nervous about it. That was sort of my process.
That's really impressive.
Person to be partnered with on group projects and
Or
stuff.
the word.
Or the word.
Yeah. So I feel like there's still a stigma about periods, even though women have had them since eternity. And so, like, why can't we talk about periods more? Is there something holding us back from being more open about it?
I mean, I think that for so long, even though people have been menstruating since the beginning of humankind, and that's what makes human life possible, like it's very much, I think, periods are sort of known as this private thing often associated with sex, and like when a woman transitions from girlhood into womanhood, and even more stigmatized for people who don't identify as women but still get their periods. But I think that it's because in our society, you're just taught to not talk about periods publicly, or only say in like really quiet circles, right? And when it is talked about publicly, it's usually in sort of a shameful way, right? There are still parts of this world where when a girl gets their period, it's the time of month where they drop out of school, get married early, undergo female genital mutilation or social isolation. And as you said, like there are like religious texts that talk about how like your period is a sign of being punished, right, for being a woman, or for the prior sins of women, right? So I think that there's this stigma around just don't talk about periods, and when periods are talked about, it's in a sort of shaming sort of way.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
So how do you think we combat that, and like how do we get women talking about their periods from a young age, or kids in general, men and women?
Well, I always say like the first step is just to say the word period, right? Like it's people still struggle with saying the word period and say the time of month, or right, like on the
Shark
rag.
Week.
Like Shark Week,
That's what we
strawberry,
call it.
you know. So I think that my first step is always like just say the word period. It's not a bad word. Like when I started this organization, we're actually called Camions of Care because even in 2014 we couldn't really say the word in mainstream media, and that was 4 years ago, right? Wow. I still do radio interviews and then get calls a few weeks later saying they can't talk about menstruation on radio because it breaks some sort of rule that you can't talk about bodily fluids on radio, right?
Wow.
There are still, and it wasn't until 1998 that the word period was even said on TV, until a Tampax commercial with Courtney Cox.
That's amazing.
So it's like pretty recent that it's starting to hit mainstream media, right? So I always say like, it really is just talking about it as a natural bodily function that happens to the majority of the human population for over 40 years of our life on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
But also talk about like why we need to talk about this, right? We need to break the stigma around menstruation because we still have so much work to do to break the systemic barriers that hinder people from discovering their full potential, right? Still in the US, 36 states have a sales tax on period products because they're considered luxury items. Meanwhile, products like Rogaine and Viagra are considered essential goods and don't have a tax, right?
Viagra?
So that's for me,
Ain't
like,
that a bitch.
as like a young feminist, I was always like, are you kidding me? Old man hair growth and erections are more of a necessity than over half of our population feeling clean, confident, capable 100% of the time, right?
Yeah.
So I think that that's why explaining to people, like, we need to talk about this, because if we don't, it will continue to go unaddressed for people who can't afford period products, or will continue to have these inequities because of the stigma.
How do you think things would be different if men got their periods?
Well, Gloria Steinem actually wrote this, this piece called "If Men Could Menstruate" in like in the 1980s, and it's one of my favorite pieces, and I write about it in the book. But it's basically this idea of men had their periods, like we would have, contests of whose float was heavier, right? It would be some sort of national holiday for it. It would if you have a heavier flow, you'll get the higher position in politics, right? So I think that, and it would also be, one of the things we're trying to fight for is access to period products in restrooms, right? So in school restrooms especially. But I think that if men had their periods, you would find period products as easily accessible as toilet paper in any restroom, right?
Absolutely.
Right now, if you walked into a bathroom and there wasn't a toilet paper, you'd be sort of upset, right? Because you need to go to the bathroom, whether you like it or not, at random parts of the day. It's the same thing with periods. And so that's one of the things we're fighting for, of treat toilet paper and access to toilet paper the same as we want it to.
Hell yeah.
That's so
So
important.
I was a very competitive soccer player growing up, and I was with my soccer team 24/7, and then we all got our periods at the same time. Is there a bunch of science around, if you're around people a lot, especially other women, you will actually get onto the same cycle?
Cycle sisters.
Cycle sisters?
I mean, there's a lot of studies that say it is, and then there's a lot of studies that says it doesn't, right? So I think that it's measuring, what studies are out there. There's still a lot of research that needs to be done about periods and menstrual hygiene and what happens when you're on your period. And I think that's one of the reasons I wanted to write this book too, of we still have so much work to do even in general research about menstruation, right? One of the conditions that affects over 10% of women in the US is called endometriosis, which is this very intense period pain, right? And the majority of people who have endometriosis don't even know that they have it because the conversation isn't there to diagnose it early on, right? And that's a condition of the body that we should have a solution to that we don't yet.
Yeah.
And it left untreated, it can make things a lot worse, right?
Yeah.
So having the conversation early is prevention.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's also the conversation of women not being able to really express to their doctors their pain, and they're not being listened to. I feel like I've seen that a lot with Lena Dunham recently. She had her ovary removed, and she was saying she had to work so hard for the doctors just to take her seriously because they were like, "You're not really in pain," and you're like, "Why?"
I mean, it's the same thing with uterine fibroids. African American women get uterine fibroids 2 times as much as any other racial or ethnic group. And it's crazy because a big part of the work we have to do is just to tell all communities what your options are, right? Because you can see rates of 2 times as many chances of having uterine fibroids correlate directly to 3 times as many hysterectomies, right? So a big part of our work is especially educating low-income communities who don't have access to streams of education on this. Here are your options. You don't have to get a hysterectomy. What do you know for period management and things like that?
Yeah, and you started Period, which is the largest youth-run non-governmental organization in women's health. That's huge. So could you tell us the process behind that and what your inspiration was?
Yeah, so my passion for periods comes from a really personal place. I founded the organization when I was 16 after my family experienced living without a home of our own. And during that time, my commute to school turned to about 2 hours long on public transportation. And where I would change buses was in Old Town, Portland, Oregon, where there were 10 homeless shelters in a 2-block radius. And I basically became accidental friends with these homeless women who were in much worse living situations than I was in, and collected these stories of their using toilet paper, socks, brown paper grocery bags, cardboard to take care of their period. And it just made me mad, right? And it's sort of a privilege check, even in this time when my family was legally homeless. I had the privilege check of I've never had to use trash to take care of something so natural, right? And I got angry about that, and then developed this sort of unhealthy obsession with periods, and spent all my free time looking it up on Google, learning about the tampon tax and the fact that periods are the #1 reason why girls miss school in developing countries, and all of these statistics that just kept kind of, just garnering this sort of fire in me that I hadn't felt before. And I think I was sort of ready to do something bigger because at the age of 16, I was coming out of my first really abusive relationship where sexual assault was a pretty regular part of my life, and I just needed something to feel very empowered. So I literally looked up on Google, what is a nonprofit? Because I knew that as a code word of how to do something good. I looked up like, what is a 501c3? What is a board of directors? What is the IRS, right? You know, gathered like a few friends of mine, specifically my co-founder, Vincent Forand, who's a guy, a non-menstruating male identifying person. And we looked up those questions, asked people. Our starting board was my mom and his dad, because we weren't old enough to sign any of the documents, and we just did whatever we could. It was literally raising money in any way we could. I would like tried busking on the street, like anything. And just by posting on social media, we started getting support from students all over the country. And now we have over 230 registered campus chapters at universities and high schools around the U.S.
Wow.
That is amazing.
You're an incredibly accomplished and inspiring, and you were actually one of the 5 21 to 21 honorees are featured in a very, very special Teen Vogue, which I rushed out to get, because why wouldn't I? That was guest edited by former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton. And you actually had an opportunity to ask her a question. What was that like, talking to her and getting to ask her about running for office as a woman?
You know, it was incredible, because actually when I got to interview Hillary Clinton was at the time when I was running for office. So 2017 I ran for Cambridge City Council. We didn't win, but we made history with student turnout, and that was enough for me to, you know. But I interviewed her at this time when I was like exhausted and canvassing every day, and just like, how do I maintain authenticity? How do I know who I am? And then I got to meet like the person who ran for president of the United States, right? And all of the questions I asked her were like, how do you maintain your authenticity, right? I think what was most amazing about it was that experience totally humanized Hillary Clinton, right? Because so much of the criticism against her was always that she was too polished, too rehearsed. It wasn't who she actually was. But I think her poise that comes off as maybe being too rehearsed is just her being so confident and calm in her voice and knowing what to say. And you felt that even when the cameras were off. When the cameras were off, she was still holding your hand and asking you, how are you? Are you getting enough sleep? Did you have some breakfast today? Like her, like that sort of rehearsed tone is just like the sort of the kindness that she has, right? And I always tell people, and I don't know if this is maybe not nice for me to say, but what I couldn't stop staring at when I was interviewing her was her hands, right? Because I think that you can't hide age or like personality from hands, and her hands are just like, you know, someone who's older and really worked their ass off, like their hands, right? And I think that when we were interviewing, like you can see my eyes are down. I'm literally staring at her hands, because her face looks perfect and polished and makeup, but her hands are still like, you know, these hands that have been working for decades to like change the world for the better. And I think that it was just an experience where like all the criticism of her being too rehearsed or anything just totally went away.
I love that.
Oh, yeah,
And
that's so beautiful.
from your own campaign and your experience talking to Hillary, you know, do you see right now that millennials are fired up, that we have a real shot of, you know, taking back at least the House?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that it really not only depends on millennials, but also Generation Z, so the generation right after millennials. Like, we have a huge opportunity in less than a month, and I'm really excited about it, because I think that we can really make a difference in it, but I'm also nervous, because I think that when you look at the numbers of who is eligible to vote, it really is millennials and Gen Z. Like, we can make the difference if we turn out. We don't have the record of turning out to vote, but if we do turn out, we could really sway it, right? And so I think that, like, I very much think that if we don't win the House back, we, as young people, have to take responsibility, because it means we didn't turn out enough, right? And that's one of the things I'm working on, is like really mobilizing Generation Z, and just trying to like mobilize us to like take action, because we are a huge population of eligible voters.
Nadia, what's next for you?
Yeah, so when you run for president, can I be part of your campaign?
15 years,
You know, I'm really focusing on this book and, you know, continuing to grow, period. We just brought on another full-time staff and sort of, you know, really growing this organization, and, you know, doing book tour and book promo. And I just hopped on also as chief brand officer at a Gen Z marketing consulting firm called Juve Consulting. So doing a lot of work just to mobilize people around engaging the young generation.
Wow.
Well, Nadia, I'm so happy that you Googled what a nonprofit was, because you're doing so much good for so many people. So thank you for
You're a hero.